Welcome to Dot Social, the first podcast to explore the role of decentralized social media. Each episode, host Mike McCue talks to a leader in this movement, someone who sees the Fediverse's tremendous potential and understands that this could be the internet's next wave. Today, Mike's talking to Evan Prodromou, one of the authors of ActivityPub, a protocol that enables the Fediverse to function. Evan is a longtime entrepreneur and advocate of open source software. He's also the director of open technology at the Open Earth Foundation. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
Okay. Evan Prodromou, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So you, among others, helped create ActivityPub as a part of the W3C working group, which I don't think that working group is still going now. The social web working group, is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So we started the social web working group in 2015, and it was based on a number of different factors coming in. So there was a previous group called Open Social, which had been supported by Google, IBM, a few other social networks, and they gradually stopped supporting that standard and passed it off to the W3C. And so one thing the W3C wanted to do was say, hey, what do we do with this standard? Which was part of why the social WG started. I think we had also seen some uptake of some of the underlying technologies, and there was a sense of like, hey, something is happening here, and the W3C really wants to do this. The W3C, I should probably say the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the organization that defines standards. They define HTML, they define CSS. They wanted to be involved with social software. They wanted to take a leadership role, but they also had some issues, right? Several of their member organizations were big social networks. And so Facebook, Twitter, Google at the time had Google+. They didn't have a lot of appetite for open social standards. So there was definitely some back and forth on it. Consequently, we had a mandate a very limited mandate for the working group and a limited time to get it done. So long way of saying that it was only a few years that the WG was around.
Wow. And so this working group, this all happened, sounds like from 2015 to around 2018, 2019, when ActivityPub was created.
Yeah, I think the last meetings we have are like January 2019, the wrap up time. So about 3 or 4 years, which seems like a long time. And it felt like a long time. But in terms of standards, sometimes you can go for decades working on the same standard. Yeah.
Right. Well, and especially that has something that has so much consequence as this particular standard. And we're going to get into all of that here. Yeah. I'm curious to know a little bit more about some of the folks that you worked with as co-authors on ActivityPub.
Oh, thanks. So there were a few people who were involved. In terms of the data structures, James Snell, who was at the time at IBM, he's now working for Cloudflare. And he was the primary architect on the data structures, but our protocol and API work, which is what the main part of ActivityPub, was 3 women who did the main development and editing. So, and now I'm going to have to pull up all my names. So we have Christine Lemmer-Weber, who was the main editor. Jessica Talon was the other editor. Aaron Shepard was the original submitter for the specification and did most of the guidance there. And then Amy Guy was did some integration at the end. So there are 5 people credited for authorship. I'm really lucky. I snuck in under the wire and got in as an author there.
So this has turned out to be very consequential work. this year in particular, we've seen a large amount of activity around ActivityPub. Why is this work so important to you? Why have you been, you continue to advance this and evangelize it? Why is this so important to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Partly it is, it's based on my understanding of the importance of social information and social connections, right? Our social software, the software that we use in social networks is, how we connect to family, how we connect to friends, how we keep in touch with people we haven't seen for years. It's some of our most meaningful connections. It's how we find work. It's how we relate to our political representatives. It's really important software. We often dismiss it like, oh, it's just Facebook, it's just Twitter, it's not important. These are the most important things in our life, right? Like these family connections, social connections. And so making those, that functionality available in a way that's more open, that people have more control over, that people can participate in better is really, it feels important. Now, I've tried to walk away several times. I wish I could say that I've been like unwaveringly supportive. I've had a lot of times where I'm like, whew, I am done with this. I did my part. I'm ready to walk away. But, it's like in Godfather 3, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. So
exactly. Well, I think everybody's appreciative of the fact that you have come back in during those times. And, I think your point about this being, a way of enabling those really important connections to thrive and to flourish and to be healthy is a big one. If you look at how ActivityPub has been, taking off over these last, I don't know, I guess 18 months or so, 12 to 18 months. What are some of your observations? What surprised you the most?
So, I think that the most important aspect of this process over the last 12 to 18 months has been developments at Twitter, or now X, right? So since the acquisition by Elon Musk of Twitter, it has shaken people's expectation that Twitter is going to have that central role in the world of social media. Not necessarily, people haven't necessarily lost faith in it, but that sense of this is going to be a monolith and everything is going to work through Twitter is no longer, common expectation. And we've seen, a lot of Twitter alternatives come up. Hive, Post News, Substack, Notes. There's probably a few dozen others that I could name, right? And Mastodon and the ActivityPub Fediverse have been a really important area that people can come to. And I think the one thing that really has been amazing there is with the growth has been also a growth of the community. I would be probably kidding if I didn't say the most surprising thing that has happened in the last 12 months has really been the launch of Facebook Threads and the announcement that they're going to support ActivityPub and allow this kind of inter-network connection happen with their community and their software, right? I think that we have, of any organization on the planet that has kind of a siloed approach to social networking, that has really put up a moat around their social network and protected the data, protected their community, Facebook has the biggest one. So finding out that they are going to support open standards has really, it was it was a really big surprise. It started off as rumors, and then when they finally announced it was like, wow, this is really happening. Yeah. Maybe when I know this is a little bit silly, but like when Elon Musk was going to fight Mark Zuckerberg, that was the part where I was like, what has happened here? Am I dreaming? I need to pitch myself. This has gotten really strange. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the times back in the early days of web where, a lot of people don't know this, but back before the web, you had AOL, you had MSN, you had, Prodigy and CompuServe and these proprietary sort of social places, internet places, or they weren't internet, they were online places. And, they did not coordinate with each other. There was you couldn't, send an email from someone, from AOL to someone on CompuServe, and there was no sort of interaction between those services. If you wanted to build something online, you had to go do a business development deal with one of those folks, right? And Netscape and the web and Mosaic and the W3C changed all that. And I remember just before I joined Netscape, seeing Bill Gates get up on stage on December 7th. I remember that date. And I believe it was 1995, I want to say. And he gave a speech about how going forward, everything that Microsoft was doing would be done on the internet, on the open web. And that was mind-blowing, right? And so, yes, I do feel like there's this moment where it feels as though the tide may well change here from this closed walled garden approach to an open model for a variety of competitive, regulatory, user demands, creator demands, variety of reasons. I think that's happening depending on the initiative, but it does feel like that moment is approaching.
It's also I love this example, Mike, because it's so true that there were those. It's very similar to AOL, MSN, CompuServe world where if you wanted to send a message to someone on CompuServe, you had to have a CompuServe account, you had to log in, use their system. In the mid 90s, around this 1995 time, they all started adding a little bit of internet functionality, right? So at first you could maybe send and receive emails, and then it got a little bit further, and then they had a web, browser built into AOL, and suddenly it just caught on overnight, and the walls really came down, and for people who didn't go through it, it can really feel those walls are up. They're going to stay up forever. Right. And it's it just takes, once the dominoes start falling, they really start falling fast. So, yeah. And, I don't I think what's really interesting is there were organizations that had kind of committed to the open web at that time that were there to benefit from that big opening up, right? So Netscape being the classic example of just hey, we have kind of staked our place in this world and everyone is coming to us now. It was a pretty amazing time.
Yeah, I agree. So when you look at now the state of where things are at with ActivityPub adoption, obviously we know Mastodon's been, probably the most well-known and most used service that has been using ActivityPub. But there's a lot of decentralized innovation happening now, right? And because of this protocol. So what are some of the projects that you're most excited about or most interested in that others might not have heard yet?
Oh, yeah. So I think one, I talked about the Twitter issues earlier this year, and kind of Mastodon takes a little bit of that Twitter flavor, right? It has that microblogging style. Another service that, was a dominant, well, still is a dominant service, Reddit, also had some issues with its big communities. And some of those communities moved to the Fediverse using software called Kbin or Lemmy. And they've replicated that Reddit experience, but it's happening on hundreds of servers across the Fediverse. And that was really interesting, the way that kind of picked up. And there are hundreds of thousands of users on each of these services. And it is really, I mean, it's really gratifying to see that the standard that we made is applicable for these different applications. But we've got all kinds of like interesting projects that are working with different kinds of sociality on the Fediverse. So we have PixelFed, which is a photo sharing and photo album service. We have Funk Whale, which is a video service. Bookworm, which is it's a lot like Goodreads, so you can write about books. And the new ones come up every day. It's really cool to see these happen. What I especially like is that creators and developers understand that the underlying structure of these services is a lot the same. We make connections, we create things, we share them out to our network, we get responses back, likes and reactions and comments. And whether it's images or bookmarks or videos, it's a lot the same. And they figure out how to map, their ideas of these different applications into that same structure, which has been cool.
Yeah, I've heard you explain this as sort of comparable to how phone systems work with number portability, with the ability to text people regardless of whether they're on AT&T or Verizon or what kind of phone they're using. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes to pull that off. But it is interesting how like that wasn't always the case. And if you changed phone providers, you did have to get a whole new phone number. And so there was a lock in there. And I think it was a regulatory change that set that up so that you had number portability, right?
Yeah. I mean, even in the early 2000s, you couldn't text between networks, right? They had their own text standards. And so you could only text other people on Verizon or only text other people on AT&T. And that interoperability really provides benefits for everyone in the area, right? Like for those account organizations, they really feel like I need to keep my 10 million users protected from everyone else. Nobody else can use them. No one can talk to them. I don't want to let them out of the pen that I've got them in. But you find out that the value to that 10 million people of your service is being able to talk to the 100 million people or billion people who are outside of your service, right? And so if you're able, like an AOL in 1995, to start enabling email, or a Verizon start connecting people via SMS across networks, you don't lose those people. They see it as value add, and they become actually more loyal to your service. And if some walk away, that's great. It actually makes the people who stay have a sense of like, hey, I'm not stuck here. I'm not locked in. I'm here because I'm choosing to be here.
Yeah. And I think that's really important for users as well as creators, publishers. Yeah. They can basically build a followership that they can rely on forever and utilize across a whole range of different services and not be tied to any one service.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really great for creators, when we talk about it, is if you are able to make choices about the service that you use for publishing text, images, videos, etc., you can make decisions about what's best for you, for your business, for the message that you're trying to get across. I think I probably won't name names for any particular networks, but one of the big disappointments for creators on some networks is that they work really hard to build up a following, to get 100,000 followers, 1 million followers, et cetera. And as the higher up they go, the less reach they actually get. And they get outreach from their platform that's like, hey, you should be, maybe it's time to start paying for some ads to reach your own followers. And it's like, we already did all this to bring people in.
Right.
So having that sense of like, hey, I'm a brand or I'm a creator, and I have this one-to-one direct relationship to my followers, to my audience, to my customers, and that's something I want to be in control of. I don't want someone telling me like what the rules are for staying in contact with them.
That's such a great example, and comes right back to the reason why you have been doing this work, right? That connection stays persistent. It's a valuable connection. People work hard to build a connection with a member of an audience that they're working to build, and to have that be persistent and durable, regardless of the service, regardless of the content you're putting out, the mode you're in as a creator, the service or tool you're using. It's kind of a mind-blowing concept. It seems very logical, but yet at the same time, obviously that's not how social media works today in these walled gardens.
It really isn't, right? And in a lot of ways, my relationship with my mom, my kids, my employer, my high school best friend, like those are mine in a way that's very deep and personal.
Right.
That's not something that belongs to Twitter, that belongs to Facebook. Those relationships are mine. And having ways to like keep those relationships as I go between platforms, to keep them alive and active, it's so crucial, right? I think we all know the experience of trying a new platform and having things you want to share with people you care about, and just being like, oh, they don't have accounts here yet, right? Like, so this photo that I want to share to my uncle and aunt, right, isn't going to reach them, and it's a really important personal thing. Like, social software is really important to our lives, and we need to be able to feel like those relationships, the content we create, is really under our control.
Right. In some ways, what you've done here with the ActivityPub work is the foundation is those relationships. And that's what the protocol effectively describes and enables, right? Is how those relationships, send and receive content. And then the tools that you use to post, to interact, communicate, are varied. You can use whatever collection of tools you want, but the relationships stay persistent across those tools, which is the exact opposite of how things work now.
Absolutely, right? Like, and we've gotten used to thinking about like our sociality is related to the app, and this app has high quality digital, right? And this one has, and it's like, well, it's not about the content. It's not about the buttons on the screen. It's about the people and about the people that we're connecting with. When we talk about social networks, when we talk about any networks, we talk about an effect called Metcalfe's law. And Bob Metcalfe was one of the founders of 3Com. And he identified the fact that as a network grows, its value grows by the square of the number of people. So like a network of 10 people has like 100 valuetrons, and a network of 100 people has 10,000, and we go up 1,000 to 1,000,000, right? It just balloons really fast, which is really great for communications, but it also means that it's really hard to break in with innovative new functionality and features, right? So if you are doing a social startup and you have a new way for people to interact, you have to just like start with your first user, 10th user, 100th users. It's grueling, right? And you're fighting all that time because people are like, well, I want to be on the big networks where everybody is, and I have a lot of value. With this kind of open standard format, you can create a better mousetrap. You can create like new ways of interacting, new structures, and you can plug it into that big network, and nobody has to like leave their other networks in order to try your software out. And I think that's going to be so supportive of innovation, right? I'm so excited to see what new things people are going to be building on the Fediverse, knowing that they don't have to start from zero, right? They can start from 100 million.
Well, you know, that's such an important point. And, you know, what you get to there also is that you also don't have to build a whole social network. So let's say you do a great, like, video filter, you know, awesome, you know, set of algorithms that use AI to do great things with video. You don't have to go build a whole social network also, right? You can just build the video filtering thing, and then that can plug into tools that people are already using, connections that are already there. And that decentralized innovation, I think you're right. I think that's going to be very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, all the things that a social network has to do, right? Like email notifications and, you know, GDPR and profile pictures and da-da-da. And it's just like, hey, I'm going to focus on what we're really good at and let's build that part of it. And we'll just leverage off the existing system. So I think that there's a lot of cool opportunities for building on these.
Yeah. And, you know, I think when we come back to that AOL example, you know, I remember they had a travel box. That was one of the things you could click on, right? But it could only advance as fast as AOL could hire people to advance it, right? But once it opened up, now you have things that we never imagined, like Airbnb and Expedia and, you know, Booking.com and, you know, just an amazing array of services that all in and of themselves are their own businesses worth billions and trillions of dollars. That just never would have happened had we not moved to open standards with the web.
Yeah, and I think especially, you know, I think that's such a great example. I think the other thing is like for the more that networks have gotten centralized. So again, you know, talking about some of the ancient history of social networks, there was a time where there were hundreds of social networks, whether it was, you know, Bebo or MySpace or this or that. There were a lot, and they have, Friendster, thank you, Tribe. They have like really condensed down to a few big players, and that means that for those few big players, what is an important enough feature to implement has the bar has raised, right? So for a Facebook, if they don't have, you know, 100,000 users on that feature, it's not worth it for them to keep supporting that. Even if it's important to you or me, it's like, hey, we're going to sunset this out, right? And so having the kind of software features and tools that appeal to, you know, I say small audiences, you know, 1 million, 10 million, even 100,000 or 10,000 for specialists, like are possible in this world, where they're less possible in one where, you know, 100 million or bust.
Right. That's a great point. And it's interesting too, because you can almost see the pace of innovation has already slowed down dramatically. Like everyone's just becoming on this in the walled gardens world, another version of TikTok. Everyone's doing vertical video now. You know, before they were copying Snapchat stories. They all just end up kind of copying each other and just becoming different versions of the same thing where, you know, I think there isn't, you know, there needs to be that outlet for totally new ideas to thrive, right?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely the case. I don't know. So I'm going to go to we've mentioned Netscapes twice here, but Jim Barksdale famous quote, that there are just like two main great businesses, bundling and unbundling, right? And there's a lot of opportunity for folks who are interested in supporting this area to think about unbundling some of the big platforms, right? Like what parts of Facebook, say, or what parts of Twitter do you think would be really work well on this federated social web? Focus down on doing that really well. And like, you've got a really great opportunity, right? Or address a certain audience or address a certain kind of platform or support, right? Be the greatest iOS marketplace app, right, for the Fediverse. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
I agree with you. In fact, that's a great segue to, the innovation so far, what we've seen so far on the Fediverse and on ActivityPub has been a lot, not all, but the popular stuff anyway, seems to be kind of a replica of the walled garden, just moved over to this, more open approach. But those are like the early days, I think, of innovation here, right? I think what you're getting at is something much bigger than that, right? How are you starting to see, or have you even sort of identified yourself opportunities where you wish there was some engineering happening where it kind of moved beyond just sort of cloning the existing walled gardens?
I think that's such a good question, right? And I think that the answer is like, hopefully it's coming, right? Like I definitely have had the conversations with people who are like, oh, we're going to look into 3D. We're going to look in VR. We're going to look at supporting even more deeply like large language models into the social networking area. The actual software on the Fediverse is still coming along. We are still in that like cloning aspect, but I think that's fine. Like that's how we, let's make a good copy of Instagram, and then we've got, the next step is like, oh, what can we do that's better than Instagram, right?
Right.
So I think those two are kind of go hand in hand. I think the last thing is like, there is the point at which we've got a really good Instagram clone, and Instagram comes in and connects, right? Like that's where we go the next step. And I think that's, what's happening with Threads too. So
right. And are there specific, when you look at the unbundling, notion, do you see opportunities there where there's some of these things that have traditionally just been a part of a walled garden social network really could be its own thing and done much better?
Oh yeah. So I think that there are a few things that are really like great opportunities right now. Like if I wasn't doing what I'm doing like full time, dating is a huge industry, right? It's very important in people's lives. There's a lot about control that we need in that kind of world, right? So feeling safe, feeling private, but at the same time making connections that matter to us. And so like that, there's an opportunity for building kind of unbundled features and kind of taking these like small networks and connecting them to the larger network. So that's one I think is really interesting. Marketplaces, so like your Craigslist or your Facebook marketplace, being able to offer things for sale, get bids on them, and then actually sell them. Having social connections that are your kind of vouch for I know Mike, my friend knows Mike, so I know that he's probably someone good to buy from, right? So those are a couple right there that are just really great opportunities. And, they're also like very potentially like great businesses to start. But other things that are interesting there are groups and supporting groups. So we've got some support for groups right now on the Fediverse, but that sense of like I have a family group. We post our kids' photos into this family group. We have a sense that it's like that everyone's there and we can kind of all participate. I think that's one that's going to be really kind of picking up a lot too.
That's very exciting. When you look at the business models, you mentioned marketplaces, do you see anything that's interesting or exciting to you materializing on that front?
Yes. I mean, there are standards starting right now for doing marketplaces, right? So, and one of the things that happens in the open standards community is we have this kind of push-pull, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the standard comes forward. We have kind of architects and standards nerds like me who are like, well, this is how this could happen. And then we have entrepreneurs, open source projects who are like, okay, we're going to kind of push the envelope on what the standard looks like. Mm-hmm. And they go back and forth and it becomes like, oh, this is how it's done right now. This is how we think it should be done. And we eventually kind of negotiate a place in the middle. So right now, the standardization around marketplaces is looking really interesting. So some great, representation of that, like make an offer, accept bids, doing auctions, et cetera. And seeing the implementations come is probably going to be the next big step. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that works out.
Where can somebody go to look at what is happening there?
Oh boy. Okay. So there are a few places that you can go to, kind of talk about some of these standards where the new development, new developments are happening. Fedidb.org is a great dashboard. It's a great place to go look for servers, software, figuring out what's going on in the world. Now it's a little bit like graphs and dials and dashboards, but it's fun to see that stuff happening. Mm-hmm. We have ActivityPub.rocks, which is the kind of old standard, and it's got links to a lot of the software, the standards, et cetera. And then for the W3C, which is where I do most of my work, we've got a social CG, which is the social community group, and that is that's the kind of place. So it's w3.org community social CG. If you search for social CG, you'll find us. But it is the kind of community of implementers that are working around these areas.
I'm curious, do you see a role for advertising in the Fediverse? I mean, obviously, it's been what has funded social media to date. It's awfully hard to go not have any advertising model at all and have all these projects get the funding that they need. What's your take on that front?
I think that anytime we are spending our attention, applying our attention to a medium, that's an opportunity for advertising, right? Like that is how advertising works, is we introduce a message into the medium. So I don't think that the Fediverse ActivityPub is different in that way. And it's a really great way to support some of these platforms and frameworks. Mm-hmm. There are some tough parts with the model, right? So probably the big one is that because users have this control, and because that locus of control is spread, it's not just one big platform. You have, where my account is, where your account is, the different apps that we use. There's no kind of guarantee that an ad that's shown at point A is going to appear at point B. Right?
Sure, right.
So there's still some work on it. I think probably the state of the state in advertising on the Fediverse today in 2023 is more along the lines of sponsored links. So what we see in influencer economy work, where you do sponsored content, you label it as sponsored and it gets out there. My expectation is that other platforms, as they come online, are going to look for ways to introduce advertisement into the platform. Likely what will happen is we'll have in-stream ads on platform. So when you're looking at, a particular site and it's your home site, you might see ads there, but those might not go out to your followers. They may see a different set of ads, right? So that kind of sense of like everybody's seeing the same ads may break down a little bit.
Sure.
But I think it's a great place for some innovation. I think we're going to see a lot happening here.
Well, and what's interesting is that the way advertising has worked in social media is not the way it has to work in going forward. And when I talk to brands and advertisers, one of the things that I hear from them is very similar to what I hear from creators, that they want to build genuine, direct relationships with their customers. And they've had to build these relationships in these awkward, problematic ways because of the way the systems all are set up today. But if you could build a system that was really geared around a genuine, direct connection between a customer or a would-be customer and an advertiser, that was a respectful relationship, I think, you could have something that would be, far better than anything we've seen with advertising so far.
I think it's so... it's such an opportunity to kind of reboot that brand customer experience or brand prospect experience. And I think that it's like, there's going to be a lot of exploration happening here.
When you look at now going forward with ActivityPub, what are the big things that you think need to happen with the standard?
Yeah. So I think probably the biggest thing that we need to be kind of emphasizing in the standard. We have talked a lot about the server to server aspect of the protocol, right? So I post a message to my server, it shows up on your server. We actually have some other modes of communication, so client to server, and that has largely up until now worked on clones of the Mastodon API, but we actually have a standard API that also works really nicely. I'd like to see more of that working. Mastodon is, clearly focused around that microblogging style, having other ways of interacting happening through that other API. It's probably one of the big ones for us, and mostly it's going to be stimulating that area. So one of the things that I'm doing right now, on top of all of my other work, is that I'm writing a book about ActivityPub for O'Reilly Media. Yeah, so it's aimed for developers. It's primarily for developers. I think that there's probably some good work to go in for other business people or people who are content creators. I'm focusing on what I know, which is the technology side. So it's going to be out in summer 2024.
Oh, that's exciting.
Right now, all I'm thinking about is like, okay, how do we communicate to developers how to build on this network?
And so when you talk to developers about building on ActivityPub, and I would think pretty much now, if you're a developer and you're going to build anything that's social into your product, building on ActivityPub just makes total sense. Right. Why would you want to reinvent the wheel and create a completely separate closed off network where everybody has to rebuild their followership and so on, when you can just be part of this broader movement and not have to build all that. Right. So when you talk to developers, what's the advice you give them on how to get started, how to think about, integrating ActivityPub into their projects?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think the thing that I try to let developers know is that there are a lot of tools already built, libraries. There are, plugins that already exist for systems. So if you're programming in Go or Rust or Python or JavaScript, there are great libraries that already exist. So starting from scratch, you don't have to do that. You can start with what's out there. And then also is that it can be incremental, right? You don't have to do the whole package all at once. You can start off with the simple parts, doing the syndication outwards. Don't worry about getting, followers or things like that, and then gradually build more onto it. So you get it. You don't have to eat the cookie whole. You can take it bite by bite. And that's probably one of the most important things for developers. ActivityPub is not a huge specification, but even so, you can pick and choose the parts that make sense for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say it is a very elegant and relatively simple approach that you guys landed on, and I think that's the beauty of it. It doesn't try to be everything. You're not trying to also deal with identity and all these other kinds of things that other standards can work on, but I think it's a very focused. I almost sometimes think of it. Maybe this is. Tell me if this is a good analogy. As two-way RSS.
Absolutely, it's RSS huge inspiration. So I think really important to recognize that RSS, like that feed structure, going back and forth. So having a feed reader and a feed generator in the same kind of processor. Another model that I really like is internet email, which is, again, a very simple protocol at its base. And it took off because it was so simple. And then as people said, hey, we need to be able to have formatted text, have file attachments, have encryption, etc. We built on top of it. We had the base platform, and then we built on top of those to get the richness that we actually needed. The web is another example, right? Building up from HTML to CSS to JavaScript to all the frameworks that we have now. And I think that's what we want to have happen with ActivityPub. The base specification does what it needs to do, but the creativity happens when you build on top of it and build cool things with it.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'm on record of having said that I think that the social web is probably the greatest single technology innovation that we've seen, that I've seen since the original web. The degree of innovation, of opportunity that I think this will unlock is just massive. You think about like when you all the folks who have built a website, and people come to the website, but then there's no way to build an ongoing relationship with that person who visited your website. You're reliant on SEO to get them to come back again. Therefore, you have to write articles that are more more clickbaity headlines. And there's this whole sort of like downward, spiral of problems that happen when you're just trying to build that relationship, because it's so indirect now. But by taking what, I think you aptly pointed out as one of the most important things in our lives, whether personal or professional lives, it's the relationships that we build. By having those be able to be formed and be persistent and easily established in an open standard, that is, I think, one of the single most important technology ideas I think that have happened in the last several decades. So
I think that it's a really great point that there is a lot happening in the space, and I think it's really cool to see how that those developments are happening.
Yeah. Well, I know you were also working on a lot of other things. How can people follow the work that you're doing, and open earth work that you're doing, continued work on the social web? Where would you guide people to follow you?
So let me say that people who care about my work on the social web really recommend following me at cosocial.ca. So my handle on the Fediverse is Evan at cosocial, COSOCIAL, cosocial.ca. It's a cooperative Mastodon service for people in Canada. We've been going for about a year now, really excited about that process. That's where I do most of my posting. In terms of the work that I do at the Open Earth Foundation, we have and I think this is going to be relatively common. It's happening a lot with open source projects, but we've got a Mastodon server that runs for our organization at social.openearth.org, and all my team has accounts there. And so you can follow me and my team, as well as like some of our researchers, our directors. So those are the two main places to find me. And then another thing that I'm very excited about, my WordPress blog is evanp.me. So it's EVANP.me. And very new. I'm probably putting myself at risk saying this, but WordPress has been enabling ActivityPub for all the WordPress.com blogs. They're working on getting that going. I lucked out. I got an early access. So if you want to follow me at Evan Prodromou at evanp.me, you can follow me there too. And that's where I do most of my longer form writing about ActivityPub.
That's terrific. Well, Evan, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and to talk to you about all of this incredibly important work.
Mike, I do want to say before I let you go, like I have to say you've been such an enthusiastic part of the Fediverse, and it's really great to have you there, have the organization there, to know that you are kind of providing that leadership, and it's cool to be on this podcast. I'm so excited to see how things go.
Thanks so much for listening. You can follow Evan's writing at evanp.me and find him on Mastodon at evan@cosocial.ca. You can also follow Evan and the whole Open Earth team via their social.openearth.org instance. Big thanks to our editors, Rosanna Caban and Anne Lay. To learn more about what Flipboard's doing in the Fediverse, sign up via the link in this episode's description. You can also follow Mike McCue on Mastodon at mike@flipboard.social. See you in the Fediverse!